Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Research to Policy webinar on determinants of STEM participation and effective interventions. My name is Simona Sankalaite. I'm part of the Knesset coordination team and a senior researcher at PPMI, and I will be the one moderating today's session. We're very pleased to see such interest from different stakeholder groups joining us today to discuss an issue that is central to Europe's skills agenda, namely what can be done to improve both interest and retention within STEM pathways. So without further ado, I would now like to hand over to our colleagues from DG EAC, who will provide a brief introduction to the Research to Policy webinar series and set the context for today's discussion. Marco, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you very much, Simona. Good afternoon and a warm welcome to all our participants and our speakers, also from the European Commission. And I would say a special thanks to Professor Eric Hanushek, who is with us today, even if it's 7 a.m. now in his time zone. So this is the fifth webinar of the EAC Research to Policy, so R2P, series on education that we organize together with the Knesset, the Expert Network on Economics and Sociology of Education and Training. Across the European Union, we see that increasing participation in STEM has become more than a simple educational goal. It's really a strategic priority. It's at the heart of the Union of Skills strategy, with the STEM Education Strategic Plan, for instance, and this reflects the growing importance of innovation, digital transformation, and scientific literacy in shaping Europe's future. And yet, despite the rising awareness of skill shortages and strong labor market demands, participation in STEM studies has not increased significantly across Europe in recent years. So the question today is not only how do we create more STEM opportunities, but also why are so many young people still choosing not to pursue STEM studies? Research tells us that the answer is complex. STEM participation is influenced by many interconnected factors. Let's think of early exposure to science, students' confidence in their own ability, family background, parental influence, the quality of teaching they experience in school. At the same time, gender stereotypes persist, discouraging many girls and young women from pursuing STEM paths, even when they show strong interest and talent. Today's discussion is really very timely and important. It's an opportunity to explore not only the challenges behind STEM participation, but also the solutions, how we can create learning environments, policies, and pathways that inspire more young people to choose STEM. Before leaving the floor to our speakers, I'm happy to announce the date and topic of the next R2P webinar. It will take place on the 9th of July and will focus on the teaching profession. In particular, it will discuss teachers' lifelong learning and supportive school leadership. If you want to be 100% sure not to miss it, go ahead and you can already register now, and the link is popping up in the chat. Thank you very much and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you very much, Marco, for this introduction and for setting the scene for today's webinar. So I would like to move on to today's presentations and with our first speaker, who is Kristof de Witte, Scientific Coordinator of the Knesset Network and a full professor in Education Economics and Political Economy at the Faculty of Economics and Business at KU Leuven, Belgium. He holds the chair in Effectiveness and Efficiency of Educational Innovations at Maastricht University, the Netherlands, and his main research interests comprise education economics, performance evaluation, and political economy. We're very pleased to have him open today's discussion. Kristof, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So thank you and welcome all of you to this webinar. So I'm very happy to present you our reports that we wrote on the STEM and what factors influence STEM participation and effective intervention strategies. So I'm very sorry. This is the end of the presentation already. This is the beginning of the presentation. So the main issue is basically this. So STEM enrollment in higher education is low in many countries and definitely below the European Union 2030 target. So the target is 32%. And if you look at the European Union, on average, you do have about 26.9% of students enrolling in higher education and STEM-related fields. There are a few countries such as Germany, Finland, Greece that do already above the target, but for many countries, we see that it's far beyond the target. An exception, for instance, would be the United States. So if the United States will come later on in the presentation of Eric to that, but if the United States would have been in Europe, they would have been largely meeting the gap. But of course, the question is, yeah, how can we close the gap? And what can we do to improve the STEM enrollment in education and in higher education? And this is where our report comes from. So together with Jaime Polanco-Jimenez, we wrote a report that you see here, and so which is available online. And I'm going to touch upon a few insights from the report. One aspect of the research, the report basically has two main research questions. First of all, what motivates and what are the factors that shape students' decision to pursue STEM education? And secondly, so what works to improve STEM participation and success? And to do so, we focus in the reports on mainly causal evidence. It's not exclusively because not everywhere we can touch upon causal evidence, but mainly we try to see what do we know from evidence coming from randomized control trials, coming from quasi-experimental evidence, etc. We also try to see what works within the European Union context. And if there is evidence from outside the European Union, what can we learn from that? And what are the drawbacks or the insights that we can take from other contexts? And we try to estimate also cost effectiveness. So very often we don't have any good idea on what are the real cost effectiveness, what is the real cost of specific interventions, but we try to give a kind of insights and a kind of estimates on what could we learn and where can we get best out of the given money that is spent on specific decisions. So first of all, let me take you within the first research questions. So what is the main motivations and the factors that shape students' decision to pursue STEM in basically higher education? And first of all, we learn in the report that it starts already far before higher education. So already at a very young age, the family environment and the school learning experiences, they already are very fundamental and crucial foundations for the STEM pathways. For instance, parental involvement. If parents believe that STEM is important and if they see that the value of STEM works, then they definitely, their kids, they enter far more higher education and STEM-related fields. And so there are a few experiments, for instance, trying to showcase what is the impact of just giving information to parents on the usefulness and the value of STEM, and we see that it really works to improve STEM participation in higher education. The same holds for education experiences. So if students see and have a sufficient STEM dose, if they have sufficient exposure in secondary education to STEM through, for instance, specific courses, through, for instance, specific activities, we see again that this works to improve STEM participation in higher education. But also creative hands-on activities such as Fab Labs, where students create things and work, for instance, with 3D printing, etc. So similar activities, and there is quite a bit of causal evidence showing again that this creates a positive atmosphere, a positive experience towards STEM. But also a more integrated curriculum, so the pedagogy as such, and showing on how technology integrates with mathematics, engineering, etc. This also improves STEM participation later on. Obviously, within the figures, we do see quite a bit of heterogeneity. So girls, they participate less in STEM than boys. And how can we close the STEM gap there? Also there, we found quite a bit of evidence that, for instance, again, parental support matters a lot. Whereas parents, they have a very decisive voice for the students and female students to participate in STEM, but also role models. There's quite a bit of evidence of having female scientists, for instance, that this might matter to improve or to close the STEM gender gap, but also framing STEM careers more with what we call the communal aspects, such as collaboration, societal benefits, etc., matter a lot already at a very young age to improve STEM participation. Next to working at a very young age, we saw that psychological and the social factors, they matter a lot. So students, they have specific beliefs, they have specific abilities, they have specific perception on what is STEM, and this matters a lot in the choice that they make later on in life. Again, looking at strong causal evidence, we see that, yeah, if we can alter the negative perceptions and the stereotypes of STEM, for instance, STEM is a very rigid field, it's an unwelcoming field, but if we can emphasize the creative aspects, the interdisciplinary aspects, the societal impact of STEM, that this matters a lot, again, to improve participation in STEM. STEM, of course, it also deals with competitive. It's a very competitive field, and yeah, prediction and the way that students feel competitive as such, this matters a lot again in STEM tracks. And also there we can see that it accounts for quite a bit of the choice that students make in the track choice. Also in terms of psychological and social factors, yeah, improving the sense of belonging, and seeing so you belong to STEM and you see a real place. Also, this matters a lot, mainly for the underrepresented groups, and so mainly, for instance, for the STEM gender gap that we see. So if you can improve this again, we see quite a bit of evidence that this works to close and to improve STEM participation. Next to what happens at a young age and the psychological factors, it is also, of course, what happens in higher education. In higher education, yeah, it deals a lot on how we organize our higher education in terms of success, trying to make sure that there is this attractiveness of the STEM fields in higher education. And there, of course, support systems have been researched and matter a lot. Support systems such as learning communities, they work a lot to make sure that students have, again, this sense of belonging, but they also get in touch with the topics and the content very well of STEM. But also bridging programs, definitely for students coming from VET, so from vocational education and trainings, to bridge them and to make sure that they can handle the level and the content of STEM programs in higher education. They are very effective, as well as some diagnostic tests to see, yeah, do I really grasp the materials? What should I do in addition? Also, their similar support systems have quite a bit of good evidence base. And again, here, both in higher education as well as on a young age, but in higher education as well, we see that role models have quite a bit of good evidence base to show that, yeah, they work quite well. So role models both within faculty, within peers, as well as in professionals. They matter a lot for both the student performance, their persistence in STEM tracks, the choice, and later career outcomes. That's in a nutshell the answer to the first research question. We try to summarize in the report those career choices with, on the horizontal axis, the different years at which you can play, what kind of interventions are from early years on in primary education and secondary education, higher education, and then later on in the career entry. And then we try to group all of them in terms of, yeah, different influences, what can be done at home level, what can be done from a psychological, social element, what can be done at school, and what can be done as a system as a whole. So depending on your own backgrounds, I would definitely like to invite you to have a look in the report and to learn more, for instance, about financial aid, about labor market conditions, but also about, for instance, mild anxiety, etc. So I don't have sufficient time to touch upon all of them, but there is quite a bit of evidence available in the reports, and I definitely would like to invite you to have a look at this. I won't touch upon all of those elements because I would like to discuss also the second research question very briefly with you. And that's basically, yeah, the follow-up question. So having reviewed, so why do students choose for STEM education? The second part deals with, yeah, what can we do now? So what is the evidence base to improve STEM participation and success? And there we try to link all of those interventions towards a kind of cost-effectiveness scheme. So based on our expert view on insights that we get from the papers, we try to judge what are interventions that have a very high cost, what are interventions that have a relatively low cost, and we try to group them based on the European Union evidence. So in the report, as said, we try to see what evidence is available for different levels and different countries, but here within this figure, we try to see what is available with evidence and causal evidence from the European Union. And then we can identify the 4 quadrants with, for instance, having a strong evidence base and a low cost on playing more visibility towards role models. There is a lower cost and also a lower evidence base, for instance, on parental STEM information, on basic maths, on online modules, etc. And so like that, you can see the different angles that work. And as such, basically, as a policymaker, we think that it might help you to get an idea on what should we do first. So things with a low cost, but with a very high effectiveness, or with a moderate cost and a high effectiveness, they should be prioritized in the policy curriculum. Of course, there are a few things that I touched upon already. So like the STEM curriculum, online trainings, learning communities. So they have a lower evidence base in the sense that there is less papers available, with a bit contrasting research, but also at a higher cost. So these are things that we should definitely examine very carefully. Also do some experimental designs, for instance, before implementing them at a larger scale and testing very carefully whether they work. Finally, I would like to just say a few words on the system level, because of course, a lot of those interventions, they deal with what we can do at home, what we can do in schools, what can we do within universities. But also at system level, as a policymaker, we should think about, for instance, the cost side. So the funding mechanism, it also shapes the incentives that we provide towards STEM education. And in the sense that, yeah, we should really weigh the costs very well in higher education, and having a better or a good view on what are the real costs of STEM education, such that there are no disincentives in higher educations, for instance, to avoid and to have too few STEM courses, too few STEM participation. And the same holds for inclusive pathways. So in the report, we present a few cases of countries where there are very nice pathways from vocational education and trainings towards STEM higher education. And we see that, for instance, having dedicated bridging programs, that works very well. Having a good sight on the knowledge gaps and trying to bridge, again, those knowledge gaps, that works very well. But also supports, if there are students from vocational education coming to higher education, supports those pedagogical environments if they enter then in the STEM fields or even in broader fields. So also there we provide in the report quite a bit of evidence on how this might work, and that this might be a very good route as well to close the gap in terms of STEM participation in higher education, and as such to reach the 2030 targets that the European Union has set for STEM participation. Voilà, that's in a nutshell the report. I would definitely like to invite you to have a look at the reports, to delve into the details, and I'm looking forward to the discussion later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kristof, for this very insightful and clear presentation. I really found especially interesting this emphasis on how STEM participation is shaped far beyond the individual choice, especially through early experiences and the broader environment in which students grew up. And this includes not only parental expectations and beliefs about the value of STEM, but also the importance of confidence stereotypes, as you mentioned, and this sense of belonging. And especially thinking from equity and inclusion perspective, the role of relatable models, so not only this parental figure, stands out as a particularly important takeaway, especially thinking of students who may not see themselves reflected in STEM, and for those coming from difficult and disadvantaged family environments. So thank you so much. And indeed, what Kristof said, for those interested, Kristof's full report has been shared in the chat. I would encourage everyone to take a closer look and also keep an eye on his upcoming work on these topics. Let me quickly check if there's no questions in the chat. Clarificatory? No, I think not. So we can then move on to our second speaker, who's Eric Hanushek, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution of Stanford University and one of the world's leading scholars in the economics of education. His influential research has shaped education policy globally, with widely cited studies on teacher effectiveness, school accountability, class size, and economic returns to educational quality. Earned his PhD in economics from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Eric, you now have the floor.
Thank you very much. Let me say before I begin that the report that Kristof gave is a wonderful report that does a very good job of summarizing a lot of evidence that's hard to pull together. So I'm sitting here in California. I'm sitting in Silicon Valley, which is probably the most concentrated STEM area in the world. And I thought it would be useful if I first start with just a largely conceptual idea of, is STEM production too small? I think almost every country in the world, from the least developed to the most developed, the political discussion is always about how do we get more STEM. And we ought to look at that, whether that makes sense. The second, I'll give a little bit of insight into what drives individual choices, and talk a little bit about some work I've done with some colleagues in the Netherlands on STEM education. And then talk a little bit about how, from my perspective, policy should be structured. Now, as we go into this, the arguments for increased STEM ought to be studied. The general US view, I think, is a little bit different from the European view. I think the European policymakers think more about direct interventions of governments to try to affect STEM production, and sort of how do you go about changing who goes into STEM. The US perspective is a little bit more, the market is doing a lot of this sorting out on its own. So the market sends signals to people about what are the economic returns and the other non-economic returns to working in different occupations. And out of that, we get sort of an equilibrium that reflects both the supply and demand. Now, the question that lies in between, let me just characterize it as the European and the American view, is the market giving the right signals? Or should we, in fact, intervene in terms of trying to change who's going into STEM and who isn't? So the general idea of the case for more STEM graduates is simply, in economic terms, externalities may provide the reason for government intervention. Externalities are basically outcomes that are seen for society, but that the individual doesn't see. The individual makes his decisions on his own returns in terms of incomes and job placements and so forth, whereas those decisions may have a big influence on things that affect other people in society. The possible externalities that are all often mentioned are whether the individual choices in going into STEM would increase economic competitiveness. Secondly, whether it having more STEM workers impacts innovation and growth in the country. And thirdly, there's always a national security concern about whether having STEM workers helps you to provide for more national security. And when I come back, I'll give you a little history of the US. The US seriously pointed to more STEM requirements for national security grounds right after World War II, where there was an obvious impact of innovation in defense areas in World War II, and this led to a push in the US to increase STEM participation for national security reasons. I'll come back to that in a minute. I think when I look at the evidence on externalities, the larger evidence, I think the linkages are not that strong. When we look in attempts to see how STEM concentrations affect each of these areas, we have trouble seeing that. But I think that that's actually an open question, and these are macro questions that go beyond the things that Kristof mentioned. And this leads me to say that one of the things that should be going on in the background is that we ought to have better assessments of the magnitudes of potential externalities. And it's clear to me, I think, that the externalities differ by country. Not all countries are as concerned about how their individual STEM concentrations will affect their national security. And so I think that this is not only a macro issue like for the whole EU or the US, but it's also differs by individual countries, what weights you would place on this, so that not every country should take the same view on how much they should push STEM education. So the US history that I thought I should mention, though, I'm arguing a little bit against what's happened in the US. There's a person named Vannevar Bush who was the head of the Office of Science and Research during World War II in the US. And his office, I think, is credited with developing radar and, of course, atomic weapons, whether that's good or bad. And coming out of World War II, Bush had a huge influence on policy in the US and developed our National Science Foundation, largely thinking of it from a national security standpoint. You can see that again. The Soviet Union put up Sputnik before the US, and this led to a great amount of discussion in the US about, are we lagging in STEM education? What do we have to do to push STEM education to be competitive with the Soviet Union? There have been endless numbers of commissions on competitiveness and defense that have happened since then. But then the US has one great advantage, that we don't have to intervene that much because our markets reward STEM workers a lot, sitting here in Silicon Valley. And we have H-1B visas, which allow us to bring in highly educated people from around the world. So as I go out into Silicon Valley, I can get almost any ethnic food I want at restaurants in Silicon Valley because we've been able to attract some of the best trained and smartest people from around the world to come work in the US. That's not an advantage that the EU has had, so that there's a difference there in possible policy implications. So let me quickly talk about a small study that we did in the Netherlands on what drives STEM choices. And in particular, the basic economic model differs from the discussions. Much of the policy discussion says, well, if we want STEM workers, what we really have to do is focus on math skills. We don't have enough math skills for people to go easily into STEM workers. And this is usually thinking about having physicists. How do we develop physicists? And we need more math skills. But that's not the economic model that is prevalent in occupational choice in economics. The general model is of occupational choice is one of comparative advantage. It's not that people with the most math skills necessarily go into STEM fields, because there are other skills that people have. There's math and language, and we look at language. This model has been around for a long time. It was developed by Roy in 1951. But if you look at comparative advantage in terms of having higher language skills than math, people might have very high math skills but still become lawyers because that's their comparative advantage. Their language skills outweigh their math skills comparatively to other people in the market. So we provide a little bit of evidence from the Netherlands on this. There was a set of surveys done of kids in the 1980s, and we got information in the 1980s about their math and language skills in the Netherlands. We could then link those people surveyed in the 1980s to their kids today. We let them grow up, we go to the Danish register, and we can link them to their kids today and follow the influence of families. Kristof emphasized the influence of parents, and more on a behavioral standpoint. What we're going to show here is that the comparative advantage in terms of math and language skills of parents transfers directly to kids. There's a linkage between parents that are more have a comparative advantage in math to their kids who also do. And so what we find is that parents' comparative advantage affects the comparative advantage of their kids. It may be behavioral, as Kristof mentioned, it may be genetic, it may be whatever. There are various reasons, but there's a strong linkage there. So that sort of sets a baseline of people who are prepared for STEM or want to go into STEM. It turns out that a kid's comparative advantage of math and language skills really affects their STEM choices. So that kids that might have high math skills but have a comparative advantage in language do not go into STEM, and vice versa. It turns out that parents' comparative advantage is malleable. Their schooling and peer groups affected their comparative advantage. So what that means is that what you do, the policies you make towards schooling today have implications not only for the kids in school, but for future generations. And so that carries through. And then finally, one of the topics of this whole webinar is that girls behave differently. We find that in terms of comparative advantage, girls and boys go into coursework in upper secondary schools at about the same rate, so that based upon their comparative advantage, there's no difference in the courses they take. But then when we follow whether they go into post-secondary schooling or jobs in the STEM fields, girls do it less frequently than boys. And this is something that we can't explain. They're influenced by comparative advantage to take courses in school, upper secondary school, but then they change in their decisions that lead to occupations. So that's an open question in our work. So let me talk quickly about the policy implications, and then we can open it up more broadly. How much STEM policy should we have? The American view is basically pay more attention to the advantages of the market. And then there's a question about, in my mind, focusing more on quality. Strong math and science skills are valuable and meets the externalities question, but should we try to tip comparative advantage toward math and STEM or not? There's very little existing evidence that I know of that talks about how far we should emphasize math versus other skills in schools, as opposed to spending more time on the quality of education in general and then getting the results in the market then leads people to do sort of the right thing. So I'll stop there with that slightly different view than from Silicon Valley.
Thank you very much, Eric, for those very interesting insights. It is nice to hear some of the same insights being echoed throughout Kristof and Eric's findings from the US context to, of course, this contextual factors. And what I found particularly interesting is indeed the gender dimension, and maybe Anna will touch upon this more in more detail. But indeed, that if girls and boys seem to respond differently to comparative advantage in their educational choices, this suggests that the general one-size-fits-all interventions are unlikely to be sufficient, and therefore policy needs to better disentangle whether lower female participation in STEM is driven by confidence, preferences, social expectations, comparative advantage, or more structural barriers within education systems. So thank you so much for those interesting presentations. And I would now like to invite our final presenter, who will bring some more overall observations and shift the discussion more towards practical side and the real world implementation. So our final speaker is Anna Lager, a digital education specialist at Girls Go STEM initiative, led by the European Institute of Innovation and Technology and supported by the DG EAC. Anna has a background in education development, international teacher training, and science education research. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simona, for introduction. And as it has been said, so I'm not a researcher, and I think that's why my focus is a bit different. But what I try to do, I try to take what we observe in our implementation of the project and look at it through the discussions from the two previous speakers, or the research findings, and see how it correlates what we observe also in practice and so on. So I'm going to talk about the Girls Go STEM initiative. And now that we have heard the factors that influence STEM participation, the first thing what I want to do is to look at our initiative and also touch slightly upon STEM perception and what STEM is, which is a bit of a, as Eric put it nicely, macro question, but I think it might affect how we all discuss things. So first, let me introduce you to the Girls Go STEM initiative. So we are quite a big initiative that is active in 37 countries, and it is led by EIT community. So at the core, we have online courses for secondary schools and for teachers. The courses focus on digital green entrepreneurial skills and are based on the frameworks from the EU, like DigiComp and Entrepreneurial Comp and so on. And of course, courses are not everything. We have lots of other activities going on. So we have hackathons, we have ambassador programs for students and for teachers. We have a yearly competition, which is called Student Challenge. And we have a flagship event where the participants go and pitch their ideas, and the community is brought together. And as you can see from the numbers, we are quite a big initiative. And now I want to refer to the nice timeline that Kristof showed. So our initiative is aimed for the secondary school. So if I look at these findings, so the key factors would be the STEM dose and the integrated STEM experiences, and we can see also lots of psychological factors, perceptions and self-efficacy, and competitiveness and peer group influence. So now I want to kind of bring this together. So our initiative, what we have, so we have the online courses, which, and I say online, but they are not exactly online, so it's a bit of hybrid approach. There's a digital content, and then there's challenges that are designed to be done in teams in the classroom or more offline, but also possible to do online if needed. And they reflect these factors that were mentioned about the STEM dose and integrated experience, because the courses are not on the, it's not a like physics chapter chapters. It's more about very diverse interdisciplinary concepts, and they highlight the relevance of different STEM approaches in different industry, from fashion to biotechnology and medicine. And we also show career spotlights in the courses. And for the teachers, we try to link what we have in the courses to the national programs and provide support materials on how you could bring that into the school. Then we have the hackathons, ambassador programs, and events and competitions, which I think as a group answer really well to these factors as self-efficacy beliefs and STEM perceptions and identity and competitiveness for the competition, and also peer group influence. And this part is very visible because we see students, we see our beneficiaries, let's say, at the hackathons and the competition and the events. And we try to engage network, role models, representatives, so people who work in the industry, people who work in this particular field. For example, hackathon is usually dedicated to some particular topic, and we try to invite the community. And this community will help us to support the message and to create this visibility and alignment. And even for the competition, I know the girls who participate from all over Europe, they keep in touch and they have like their own chat groups and they plan trips together. And like then they sometimes even decide where we want to go to study afterwards. So you can see how this group, like peer influence affects. Another point I wanted to talk was this, not the answer, but maybe more for raising a question, going back to Eric's question of if STEM production is too small. And this is just something from Eric's slides that we saw, that it was about covering economic competitiveness, innovation, but the evidence on linkage is not strong. And I want to bring this discussion with also Kristof's presentation. It was not, I think, in today's slide, but it was in this full report that Kristof shared. So I saw that this part, that the perception of STEM fields is quite rigid and narrow, and it, even if students are interested, it might not to choose to go there. And this is something that I've seen also when I was a teacher, when I was training teachers, and they were saying that, like, okay, because like the perception that it's very strict and very narrow, and that the image might need to be broadened. And I think that this economic competitiveness and innovation and growth is actually more about this collaborative creating, like this also set of skills. So now I will show some illustrations. They are not nice. I used AI for them, but maybe it will just give a slight idea. So when we talk about STEM, this is what we basically kind of what usually people think. So there's like, 4 disciplines that are kind of what they work together, but still they are kind of individual silos. And this is it. What I think we need to highlight, and this is highlighted in the Kristof's report, that if I take this science, which is now this always like this white coat person, it's actually within the science, there's so much more, there's so much richness inside it. This is just some example also from the AI. And these professions or some other professions, this is just a sample, is not really visible. And students usually don't know that. For them, scientist is this white coat person. But what can be there actually is much more richer. And even if I look at only one, let's say marine biologist, which is already like a bit different than just this white coat person, around this, there's so many other things. So like there's an actual like physics, chemistry, geology, biology related to oceans, so marine, like for the context, and we have sensory in GIS infrastructure, the modeling system, the application domains. Then there's also law and governance who should lead this, and engineering to enable the infrastructure, and of course this is societal translation. So I think that the STEM to answer this economic competitiveness, it shouldn't be this first picture with four people. It's more about these STEM systems, which include much more elements that work together as a system. So in that sense, I think that what we at least try to do for our program is to show what can you do, that STEM is not just, okay, you will be standing in the lab for the rest of your life, but what actually are different aspects of STEM, and find, as it's nicely said here, your desirable personal identity. Which of this, spectrum of things that you could do, what you relate to. And this is what we're trying to do with our project as well. Finishing up, so this is just about our project. So we have the digital interventions and different STEM activities. And as it was highlighted by Kristof, that professional role model visits, well, for us, it's not only visits, it's any hackathon where we have a guest or speaker or mentorship as a prize, let's say, it's always very valued by the students. So I think through this more support in the beginning towards this more autonomous and the system that can self-sustain itself, this could be the way. Yes, and that's it from my side. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Anna, for your very insightful contribution and for bridging research from Kristof's side, policy from Eric, and practice from your side so well. And of course, thank you for all the great work you do at Girls Go STEM. So with that, given that you already opened the discussion a bit more broadly, I would like to move to the joint discussion phase. And at this point, we open the floor for a broader exchange based on all presentations and in general your backgrounds. And I would like to start with the question from the chat. So thank you, Sabrina, for sharing your question there. Kristof already had an attempt to answer it in writing, but please feel free to also open your mic and answer it here. So I will just read it for everyone. Could making STEM more connected to real-life issues and/or creative subjects in education help more students choose STEM studies? So please, the floor is yours.
Maybe I'll go ahead because I try to reply indeed. I'm trying because I first replied to the panelists, so sorry for that. And then I thank you for echoing this to the full group of audience here. But indeed, so thank you very much, Sabrina. I guess indeed, so in a few of those activities that we reviewed, you see indeed this creative component. And this also is reflected in Anna's presentation. So you see the hackathon, you see, for instance, the Fab Lab style activities, but also the integrated STEM curricula. So not just the silos, but having a broader picture and showing how mathematics, for instance, is not a very abstract thing, but it enters into the engineering component, it enters into the technology component, etc. So, and then you really get the Silicon Valley idea. So that's what Eric is referring to. You see that you need all of those aspects together, and then of course it's very attractive. But it's not the single bullet. It's not something you can just do. You need to see it as a part of a broader, comprehensive element as well, because I connected to the role models, confidence building, etc. So it all connects to the other parts. And I just want to reply maybe in a few seconds as well to Anna's presentation and Eric's presentation, because in Anna's presentation, thanks for that, Anna, you see very well that it's important to work from a specific evidence basis. So I liked very much that you tried to connect it to the scheme that we provided in the reports, because very often we see that in practice we do a lot of things and we think that the new thing works better than the old thing, but just having a very sound and good review and evidence-based behind that is crucial. So like that, we don't spoil the money just by doing things and then seeing that it doesn't work, but connecting it and thinking on what works, to whom, evaluating it in a small scale and then expanding it to a larger scale. I think that's what you illustrated very well in your presentation. Thanks for that. And the same holds with Eric's presentation. I really liked the idea of the importance of parents indeed. So in the report, we didn't touch upon the more genetic part, which or the transmission family skill part that you had in the presentation, but indeed it matters a lot, and you see that family supports and family as a whole, the importance of parents, that this is crucial also here, of course, and I guess that's also policy-wise very important because it all starts at a very young age, and yeah, if we can change things already there, then of course we get the fruits at later age. And of course it won't fill or it won't be able to reach the gap and the EU targets in the very short run, but at least in the longer run, of course, this matters a lot. So that's definitely the main insight that I would like to echo from your presentation as well.
Could I just add one little answer to this question? In the US, we find that kids in school have no idea of the alternative professions that they can go into. And there's been a lot of recent discussion about how we can provide better information to kids in school who are making choices that have long-run implications. You see part of this as people leave schooling and go into occupations. We have tremendous turnover in the first 5 years of work in the US from people who change occupations, change jobs, change everything because they're sort of experimenting on the fly with what they want to do and have little information about that. And I think it's much higher. I haven't actually looked at the data, but I think it's much higher than in the EU, where you have much more apprenticeship programs and so forth that get people directly into occupations and cut down the amount of turnover that you get. Now, you have to balance, is that turnover good or bad? But I should say that all of the providing information, I think, is something that we do very poorly in the US.
Great. Thank you. Just, Anna, if you have the quick comment, go ahead. I'm just being mindful of time, so I give the floor to you for a brief comment.
Yes, I just saw a question. Can I answer that? It will be a bit faster than typing. So there was a question about structured study counseling creative STEM activities. So we usually provide mentorships for the students who participate in our activities quite often from the professionals in the field. And we also have yearly competition, and each course have a team challenge which requires some sort of creative thinking. I will put the link about our project in the chat if that's okay, and you can read more in details there. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I would now like to move on to a more general discussion, and I will share my screen and we will move on to Padlet questions that my colleague will share in the chat. So we invite all speakers to reflect on these questions as well as all participants. 1 second. So you should be able to see my screen now. So let me just read the question out loud for those who might not see it yet. At what stage do students typically disengage from STEM pathways, and to what extent could education policy influence these choices? Are the drivers of disengagement different for girls and boys? I don't know who would be ready. Maybe Kristof, you could start. And once again, I encourage all the participants to add their comments in the Padlet.
Thank you very much, Simona. Yeah, so it's not an easy question because, of course, there is not a single age at which you can identify that it is engaged from STEM pathways. I guess what we see in the report is, yeah, a lot of things happen, and it's also in Eric's work that he just presented. A lot of things happen already at a very young age. and already definitely before entering higher education. And I guess a very decisive moment is in secondary education and the transition and towards higher education. So yeah, I guess if we develop policies, that these are the things that we can do. So in the report, we call them the psychological and social factors. So with individual perceptions, with more system constraints on financing, etc. But also there, and I guess it connects to Anna's presentation on the gender. We see that, yeah, stereotypes, for instance, the sense of belonging, the perceived fits, all of this matters also differentially for girls and for boys. And yeah, also there we see that indeed. So this helps, or this creates some disengagement from STEM pathways.
So if I might add a little something, I don't think I explained in great detail what we had done in our study of the Netherlands, but I think it also illustrates things for the whole EU. In the Dutch system, you have sorting that goes on at the end of primary schooling. And so what we looked at were the comparative advantages of kids in terms of their math and language scores at the end of primary schooling or the beginning of lower secondary schooling. That put them onto a path where they selected a set of courses that if you didn't make the right choice at that point, you weren't going to do STEM because you ended up with courses that did not allow you to go on to advanced coursework in STEM areas. And I think that that's more common across many countries in the EU, where you have early sorting of and tracking of students into different areas. And so you have to look at those early performances in schooling activities, because they determine whether it's at all possible to get into STEM, or at least feasible in some sense.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Eric, for your contribution. And we see that it is also in line with what one of our participants has now shared to the Padlet. But indeed, we should focus on interventions as early as possible. Anna, would you like to comment on this question?
Yes, of course. So about the stages, what we usually see, kind of back in Eric up on that one, that's by upper secondary school, there's a decline. So even if the students are doing well, but they sort of lose interest and they kind of choose the pathway and go somewhere different way. About the educational policy, I think this may be not my place to have any recommendation regarding these things, but one thing that I see working with so many countries in the EU, that first, there's no one solution that fits all, but for example, the more flexible pathways where, like Kristof was mentioning, the transitioning even from that pathways or kind of changing along the way, where you can change and maybe allowing to have different combinations. So it's less strict, but some countries have really this very pre-chosen things that are different to escape. So I understand. And yeah, that's from my side.
Absolutely, I agree. I had some experience in teaching in a Dutch school, and I'm aware that children there already at the age of 12 are kind of already expected to choose a pathway, whether they will pursue a university degree or more of a professional school path. So, of course, expecting that from 12-year-olds feels extremely early. And we also see that in the chat from one of our participants, that indeed this is also echoed, that it might not be such a good idea to influence kids too early to choose their pathways, especially if it's not a flexible one. Would anyone else have some comments? Also, maybe a reaction to our, for now, only Padlet input. Maybe anyone has some knowledge on effective early years interventions. I know we have talked about, well, Kristof, you talked about successful interventions a bit later on. Maybe you have some knowledge on early years interventions.
Yeah, I guess it also connects to what we have in the report on multi-anxiety. So it touches again on the work that Erik did in the Netherlands, but you see that many students are also scared of math, and sometimes we also say it in the media, etc. So you see it's quite popular to say that math is not your favorite subject, and etc. So all of these things, of course, they matter in the exposure and the on how we nudge students towards specific tracks or towards specific fields and how we perceive that. So that might also be a kind of a mechanism. I guess also self-efficacy and signaling that it's something not necessarily the market rewards, but you can do that and you should go for specific, or it's worth to pursue specific careers as well. So also there we have quite a bit of evidence that this works very well, and it's not necessarily indeed. So I agree with what has been said in the chat, that we should focus too early on specific pathways, because of course we have STEM, but we have also different fields which are very important, and so it's not only STEM, but at the same time we should get the best out of every kid and make sure that indeed students do what is important for society, what's important for their own. So that's a bit of the externalities that have been discussed. So the broader societal goals are very important there, and so making sure that people make a very informed choice and don't don't have the stereotypes and don't have the anxiety as such. I guess that's very important in similar decisions.
Yes, great. Thank you, Kristof. Actually, with that, I would like to move on to our second Padlet question, which is actually very closely related to what we're discussing now. So 1 second, I will just open it here. I think you should be able to see. So indeed, if early STEM experiences seem most decisive, to what extent can university-level interventions still influence these outcomes? And how should we shape the allocation of policy effort across educational stages? So more so continuing our discussion, would anyone like to have a go at this question as well?
You can start. Even that my main focus is secondary school, but we partner with different universities and networks of universities. And what we see is that bridging, like smart bridging throughout all the transitioning phases is very important. So I think that if the university can make a very clear bridge from the school throughout the studies to maybe some work placements or some work-related events, so it's very clear for the student what's going to happen, how, and like it's very visible for them. So it's not like, oh, I always liked physics, so I will go study physics. And that's like what I'm basing on. Of course, it's great, but ideally we want to have like this a bit more mindful approach, that it's very structured and clear. And also I think if these transition phases are bridged very well, then the loss will be less. That it's like, if it's clear how it will go, then maybe more students will be more brave and actually, okay, I will try that because it's a very clear how it will work out and what options can I have. Well, what if I don't like it and what could I do and so on. So on that sense, thank you.
So I might make a quick comment here. It's kind of a simple comment. In post-secondary work, at least around the US, you see students make choices of what they're going to do by basically two factors. One is how good is the faculty in different fields at the university they're at, and secondly, what are the market signals? So that sitting here at Stanford, we probably have the world's best computer science department. And Silicon Valley, at least before AI, was hiring a lot of our graduates in computer science. Half of the undergraduates at Stanford have a minor or a dual minor in computer science. Students just make these choices, and that's changed over time. If I look back 5 years, you would not see the same concentration of undergraduate students. And so it's whether the university provides a good interface to the current market is what I see as being important.
Great, thank you. Kristof, do you have anything to
Yeah,
comment?
maybe a bit more complementary to what has been said before, but I guess also in higher education, indeed, so we see quite a bit of dropout in STEM programs and low success rates. So also there, we can do quite a bit, I guess. So in terms of having good early warning systems and having good explanation on what it is about, the bridging programs that Anna talked about, but also, yeah, most close, clear peer learning, tutoring models, all of those things. We know that there is a very strong evidence base. For instance, tutoring works in a very effective way to make sure that we get the best out of the students and that those who have the potential to succeed can succeed. So that's definitely something we can do in higher education, and it also connects to the funding models that I presented during the presentation. But in many countries or systems, STEM is often underfunded, and we know that the cost for STEM education is just simply a lot higher than teaching economics, for instance, or teaching languages. Simply because you need to work in small groups, you need to have laboratories, you need to work in a very hands-on way with students, and so we need a lot of capacity. And so if at system level we don't have the right incentives and the right weights to make sure that students are funded in an equal and a good way, then you have a lot of capacity constraints at university or higher education level. So also there, we need to think about it to make sure that we have sufficient capacity, but also sufficient quality, because we can have more graduates, but if the quality is not the same, there's an issue as well. And yeah, we see, for instance, in PISA studies that the level of mathematics, for instance, declines over time. So we need to bridge more. We need to have them more at higher levels while entering higher education to make sure that the students that we deliver towards the labor force, that the degree really signals a very good quality, and that they have sufficient human capital, basically. So these are also things, of course, that we can do. And then, of course, there are also the role models that I said before. But definitely at university levels, we see that there is few female professors, for instance, and definitely in the higher echelon. So also there we can do better, I guess. It's changing a bit, but also there we need to change it maybe quicker as well, because it's a very powerful tool to make sure that students that we close the gender gap in terms of STEM education as well. So yeah, despite a lot of things, of course, happen already in secondary education and primary education, we can do quite a bit of things as well in higher education as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Kristof. And indeed, what you said is also echoed in the Padlet from our participants. So first, that what matters is not only who enters these programs, but of course to make people stay, right? And central to that is, of course, making STEM careers after university to be welcoming, meaningful, or attainable, as one of our participants calls it. So definitely, fully agree. And again, being cautious of the time, I think for now I would like to close the Padlet discussion, but these links will remain open. So if anyone was not able to share their inputs in time, feel free to add, and we will review the contributions later on. And given that the discussion took a bit less positive turn, let's say, I would like to ask each of our participants to maybe close the session with, let's say, a takeaway or even a direction for from your fields, whether research policy and practice, what can be done now, let's say. So, yeah, whoever wants to start, maybe Anna, you could go ahead.
Yes, so first of all, thank you very much, both the audience and the speakers. It was a pleasure to discuss these things. And to be honest, when I saw Kristof's presentations, well, I actually read the full report because it was that important to me and interesting. And I think that I saw lots of highlights that we either are doing or we're thinking that, oh, we could implement that. So now that I see, like, you know, some rigor evidence that maybe it would be the push that we needed to do something. So thank you, Kristof, for your hard work and for the results. We'll try to do that. And I also feel that, like Eric concerns, like Eric gave us quite a different perspective, I think. And the question of labor market, I think, is always important. And especially now after AI entered and so on, like, I think there's a big shift and we don't know actually what is coming and what jobs, like we can try to predict, but maybe not that accurate. But I think it's an important discussion to have between all the stakeholders. So thank you, Eric, for that important thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Eric, would you like to go ahead next?
Well, I come back at each level of education to quality issues. We do a lot of counting of how many people go into STEM or how many people graduate from upper secondary schooling or post-secondary and various types. But what I see is the variation in quality of people at each stage is the most important thing. So I, in my own thinking about policy, always emphasize the quality of basic education, foundational skills that are the skills at primary and lower secondary that allow people to go into highly technical fields and STEM fields, and then having quality instruction in secondary and post-secondary work. But that what is done in terms of foundational skills basically determines the outcomes that you'll get at the end of the schooling period. And that, I think, is the most important issue. And it's sort of disguised because we just count people going in different areas, where in fact having high quality non-STEM fields might be much more important for an economy than having low quality STEM fields. And so that's my sort of emphasis on overall schooling policy.
Thank you, Eric. Kristof, any last words?
Yeah, thank you very much. I maybe have two takeaways. So first of all, maybe is think about a pipeline strategy. So we see that start at young ages and then don't expect that everything will change just by one single intervention. So very often you need to make sure that things are persistent to have several interventions. Think about what happens in the family, what happens with the parents, what happens in early age, what happens in secondary age, etc. So think about the full pipeline to make sure that you reach what you would like to reach. And secondly, please evaluate. So if we did the research and we try to look at causal evidence, we try to look at experimental, quasi-experimental evidence. There is a lot from the US. In the US, it's more custom to think about things in a small scale and then to have it at a bigger scale. I guess within Europe, we don't have this yet. So that's definitely Marco's mission to make sure that we have a more evidence-based and evidence-informed paradigm here as well. But please think so and do so such that we don't invent the wheel all the time and make the same mistakes all the time, because very often we see that the new thing doesn't work as effectively as you thought it would work, or that it's very costly to reach the target that you would like to do and to obtain. So Look at the costs, look at the effectiveness, try to have this imbalance such that we can use the scarce resources that we have in the most effective and efficient way. And this holds more in general, but it definitely holds also for STEM education and making sure that that we have a good and very qualitative labor force later on as well. So all of us will benefit from that. So these were my two takeaways. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristof, and thank you very much to all of our speakers for today's excellent contributions, and also to all participants for joining and engaging in the discussion. Given that we run out of time, I would like to thank you all once again. And as mentioned, this webinar is the first one of 2026 webinar series, however, not the last, so feel free to join the upcoming webinars as well. So thank you and have a great rest of the day.